Okay, so we found another one. This is my interview with Anthony Davis, New York transplant, operatic composer, Pulitzer Prize winner here just recently, May of 2020. Um, Father to a professional baseball player, son of the prior chair of the African American Studies Department at Yale. They hosted his family hosted Martin Luther King, and when he visited Penn State back in the day. His journey has been heavily influenced by the civil rights movement and all that was going on at that time in the '60s. And he's an important voice, and it was my pleasure to speak with him. We cover race, we cover faith, and obviously the potential for art to change the world. So I hope you enjoy it. As I say, we found another one, and we're going to keep going. So this is a project to unearth Black excellence in San Diego, and I hope you enjoy this interview. Peace. I'm hoping to, from your story, mine gems that are teachable for folks, specifically in
Sure.
San
Yeah.
Diego, and I would even go so far as to maybe say black men in San Diego, um, uh, given the current situation. So, I know we're doing this in the backdrop of coronavirus and George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, as I was mentioning before, just even more recently. And given that your work is so centered around these moments. Oh, are you there? Oh yeah, you are.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, you were focused. So I thought that you froze, and so a moment I was like, oh no, are we Zoom shutting down?
No,
So
no.
anyway,
Uh,
but
I
maybe,
have to make
maybe
sure I'm still moving.
no, you're doing great. You're doing great. So maybe we could start. I love kind of using story as motif, right? Kind of how did you get
Uh,
here? What are you doing here? And where are you going? That kind of thing. You kind of, you know, almost deserve you escape introduction. You've been described as a national treasure, and you're this extraordinarily prolific creator. And but I'm curious how you would tell a bit of that story. What is it that brought you here to San Diego? What's some of the backdrop to that? Not,
oh,
not,
to
not
come
even
into San
mentioning the
Diego.
Pulitzer. Yeah, to San Diego specifically, that part.
Okay. Well, I can mention actually specifically my friend George Lewis was teaching here,
Mm.
and he had been here for a number of years, and so I guess he took a sabbatical for one semester at one quarter, and so he asked me if I would come and and come here for one semester to to teach for him. So I agreed to do that. So my wife and I came out here,
When was that?
and this was in '96, 95 or '96, trying to remember. And
From New York?
yeah, from New York. And I still had my place in New York. I was still living in New York, but we came out here for a few months, and we liked it. We were, I mean, I was really impressed with the university and living in San Diego, and so I kind of asked, if any position comes up, for a regular position, I might be interested in it. And then it turns out it did, and then I applied for the position, and I was hired then. I think I arrived here at the end of '97, and uh, it was a big change for us, because both my wife and I are New Yorkers,
Yes.
and we had just had a baby. We had about so we had a 6-month-old baby when we came here, and so and so it was a huge change. So I remember, we didn't know people for babysitters or anything like that. So it was like,
Yeah.
so it took a while to get adjusted here, and my son actually now he's 22 years old. So but he's so it's just he started his interest in sports, and he's now a professional baseball player. So
Oh, oh
he
wow.
plays in the Pittsburgh Pirates organization.
That's
So
beautiful.
we, a lot of our time in San Diego was going to T-ball, and
Yes.
then travel ball, and then he
Yeah.
played for University of California. So he went to Cal games, and then
Yeah.
eventually, he when we went to the minors, so we went to. his last summer we went to see some of his minor league games
Oh,
and in
well,
Greensboro.
you
So
know, we've been here since '02, and I've heard San Diego described as the loneliest city because, contrary to a place like New York with the boroughs and the spots and the clear hubs of community, San Diego,
it's more diffuse. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
few. So it sounds like baseball and some of that, that often is the case. You end up hanging out with your kids, friends, parents, or something. Was that an early source of community for you?
Mm, well, it's weird. The baseball families are really conservative.
Yeah.
So by and large, we had one family who were actually she was Persian,
Yeah.
and her son was one of Jonah's friends on one of Jonah's teams, and she used to make jokes all the time. This is during all the post 9/11
Yeah.
stuff,
Yeah.
but so she would threaten the umpires, if
Yeah.
if they keep calling the game, they're calling. Oh, she'll get their terrorists on.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny.
So we used to sit with her and laugh. And we
Yeah.
just had a big laugh watching these games.
Uh,
But because both of our sons were different, African American and a Persian
yeah.
player, they
Yes.
stuck out in the mostly white world of
Yes.
baseball. But
Yes.
there are a few African American players we in town that we got to know. But
Yeah.
mostly it's been a white suburban sport.
Yes.
Baseball.
Yeah.
It's interesting because there's baseball is the white suburban thing, and then Dominicans and
Yes.
Venezuelans,
Yes.
and
Yes.
it's like
Yes.
and Koreans now too.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, I
so
asked somebody about that one time, what that was all about. There's people with theories around the way the game is played or how the sport is managed or whatnot that kind of turn, the black kids aren't as drawn towards baseball as they once were. Maybe it's accessibility to open spaces like that and then has some
yeah, it's costs
socioeconomic.
a lot of money. I
Yeah,
mean, that's why I
yeah,
think the
yeah,
monetary thing because of bats and gloves and
yeah,
ball. You're
yeah,
buying things, and then and to play at a high level, you need a lot of support.
yeah,
It's uh, So and my son was evident he was a very good athlete. So
mm,
so he meant he had to join a travel team, and so
yeah.
he was going from San Diego to Florida, play teams in
Oh,
Florida, and
wow,
going to
wow,
Atlanta, Georgia to play in tournaments in
wow,
Georgia.
wow.
So that he was to play with other people on those level who are
Yeah,
from all over the country.
yeah. And you said, did you say you have two sons?
Yes, I do. My
Uh,
older son lives in New York.
God,
He's he writes science fiction novels. He's
yes,
40 years old, and
yeah,
then my younger one's 22.
yes. Wow. I was reading a little, blurb on your various operas, and the Under the Double Moon, is that it was described as a science fiction one, and I was, you can note the clear theme, the kind of African American civil rights theme, and then you have these moments, and I was like, sci-fi. Well, I wonder where that's coming from.
Yeah,
So
no, yeah. See, I didn't want to be stuck in a box.
yeah,
I also I was interested. I like science fiction a lot,
yeah,
and my former wife, my first wife, was a science. She wrote science fiction. That's what she did. So I was introduced to that world. So I
God,
knew that world pretty well, and I always wanted to do. I thought science fiction would be a good vehicle for opera too, because
yeah,
the idea of, I mean, actually, if you look at Star Wars, there's space
oh
operas anyway,
yeah, yeah,
but
yeah,
so, but I think a lot of the issue you can approach issues of
yeah,
through the science fiction lens,
yeah,
like writers like Samuel Delany and
yeah,
Octavia Butler,
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah, yeah,
so science fiction is a fertile ground for us,
yeah, yeah. I was
also
reading.
reimagining race in the future, imagining
Yes,
race and gender issues, all kinds of things from a different perspective.
yes, yeah. I was reading the back of I think The Handmaid's Tale or something.
Oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
kind of that
A
kind of
friend of mine
thing.
I know, Paul Reuters wrote an opera based on
Oh,
Handmaid's Tale.
really?
Yeah,
Oh, wow. Wow.
yeah. Handmaid's Tale is interesting. I was just watching on, I guess, on Hulu or something,
I haven't
because
seen
now I have to watch serial TV because I don't have any. I can't go to movies or anything.
this. Yes.
So I
Welcome.
started
Yeah.
watching that.
Wow. Wow. So,
It's
so,
Mark Atwood thing. Yeah.
so I feel this clear kind of African centered interest in your work. When you came then here from the East Coast, was that important to you? I know we're talking a little bit about community and the relative uh, lack if you unless you go literally find and kind of sit next to
Right, right.
folk. What was that? What had your context been like prior to coming and then getting? I've talked to some black folks who've come from D.C. or Chicago and show up here and they're like, "Ooh, this is different," and they have to adjust.
No, it is different. Yeah. I lived in New York for 20 years, so
Mm-hmm.
I was used to New York City.
Yeah,
My brother still he lives on 130th Street in Harlem. So
yeah,
I mean, I know how connected he feels to the community.
yeah.
I feel it too, because I grew up when I was born in Paterson, New Jersey, but my parents lived in Harlem, when I was
Mm,
a little kid, so
yeah.
until I was 4, I lived on 138th Street in
Wow,
Madison, so, and then we moved to New Jersey.
wow.
But I've always been a kind of a New Yorker at heart. I always
Yeah,
identify kind of as a New Yorker. I
yeah.
mean, it's something that happened. And when I moved here, I sort of became, a lot of my friends were expatriate New Yorkers. We
Yes,
have all kind of
yes,
whole bunch of us. Quincy Troop was a close
yes.
friend of mine.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
he's actually originally from St. Louis, but I
Okay,
knew Quincy, and we used to
okay.
hang out when he was here.
Yeah,
So, and I think that New York tie is very strong, because we think
yeah.
about, how we look at the world or stuff. But now I appreciate more and more being a Californian, being here
Well,
in
it's been
California.
23 years or so. So what has kept it? What has you know? Yeah, what is making San Diego stick for you? And do you seek out any of the black aspects of this town, or is it more in your conceptualization and kind of art that you kind of work some of that out?
I think I think through the art I work it out
Yeah,
mostly. I mean, I've done some things at Malcolm X Library, and
yeah,
I've
yeah,
been down, Southeast
yeah,
San
yeah,
Diego to do
yeah,
things and stuff.
yeah,
Um, but I think a lot of my activity is sort of reconnect in your mind. I mean, the way
yeah.
when Ralph Ellison, for example, when he wrote Shadow and Act when he was in Italy,
Mm,
and it was because when you leave the community, you leave that, it makes you reflect on it,
yeah,
makes you reflect on your culture. You
yeah,
get a different understanding of
yeah,
what
yeah,
of what you left behind,
yeah,
and when you and so I think that happened with me definitely, because when I
yeah,
to go back to 1989 in the Central Park Five.
yeah,
It's something I vividly remember. Or I lived in
yeah,
New York at the time, so
yeah,
I think those that you don't New York and that community and those feelings of being of who you are never leave
yeah,
you.
yeah,
Even when you move somewhere else or you go somewhere else, but you gives you a chance to reflect and think about that, about what
yes,
it means and what
yes.
that connection is.
So speaking of that, roots and kind of the crucible of identity or what have you, I was listening to some of that conversation you had with Cecil, and you'd mentioned you were in Italy, I think, when you had this kind
Yeah,
of Nietzschean
exactly.
contemporary
Italy
moment.
again.
Yeah, So what uh, root wise, do you? What is the African part for you, or the African American part? How has race and that formed your own particular identity and knowledge of yourself?
Well, it was important. It was important for me. I mean, actually, I went through crisis and early on in my teens, because I grew up in I would live. We were living in for 10 years in State College, Pennsylvania, which is a very isolated. I
Mm,
mean, really,
mm,
very few African Americans, except
mm,
for football players who were on playing it for Penn State.
mm, mm,
And I got to know some of them too.
mm,
but
yeah, yeah,
but it was very very isolated in
yeah,
terms of that.
mm,
And when the whole Black Power movement, the civil rights struggle in the '60s,
mm,
and living there, I
mm,
began to, it became kind of a assertion for me.
yeah,
I was
mm,
very fascinated as I became. It became even that much more important, because it's something I had to claim in a way,
mm,
as part of understanding who I was as a person,
mm,
and then understanding. I think when I went to Italy, ironically, I was a classical musician, completely playing a pianist,
Mm,
and I couldn't bring all my music to Italy to
mm,
to bring because we had to we were limited in terms of what we could bring with us
mm,
to Italy.
mm,
So and the irony of my father was given a record, Monk in Italy,
mm,
which is Thelonious Monk record,
mm,
because we were going to Italy. So, and my father wasn't into it that much, but I loved the record, loved
mm,
the music. So I learned all the music on it.
mm,
And
mm,
so I started to play when I was in Italy is when I started to play jazz, when I started to improvise and I started to listen particularly to Thelonious Monk's music and
mm,
emulated him and played some of his compositions. And I started to compose myself.
mm,
So, but it was a reawakening of understanding that the importance of being an African American, a Black person, even though now it's in Italy in a foreign country and all this stuff, but it's in my how I was thinking as a person, you know, and also in a way claiming an identity. You know, I thought that was very important to me, and so and that really uh, altered my whole direction in terms of
yes.
where my art was going and what my focus was going to be, and also trying to figure out how I could um, be part of the movement, but
Mm,
through my music.
mm,
I mean,
mm.
my father hosted Martin Luther King when he came to speak at Penn State, and I actually wasn't there; I was away. But
Mm,
you know, and his telling me, you know, what Martin Luther King was like and all that. So that's stuff that began to uh, become really important to me,
mm,
uh, and understanding that you know, becoming a be and thinking about my identity as an African American.
mm. So now this causes me to ask, where was your father situated in culture that would have had him be the place where Martin Luther King stayed? Was there?
One of the few Black families in State College, Pennsylvania. I mean,
Got
he
it.
was a professor at Penn State,
Okay.
so that, you
Got it.
know,
Got it.
and actually, you know, we hosted a lot of, you know,
Yeah.
when African American visitors came,
Got it.
or even the football team, we'd have they would come for thanks. Some of them came for Thanksgiving, you know, stuff, you know,
Yes.
because we had
Yeah.
Thanksgiving. So
Yeah.
you know, we have Dave Robinson, who was a great linebacker who went to
Wow.
Green Bay
Yeah.
Packers after,
Yeah.
and Franco Harris and Lydell Mitchell, and you
Yes.
know,
That's
so
wow. Yeah.
it's like it was definitely a connection with that. And Coach Paterno was a good friend of my father's.
Wow. Wow. So then I thought where I was going initially, I was like, well, maybe his dad was either in faith spaces or educational spaces. I feel like there are some inklings, you know, maybe not even inklings. There's some overt kind of spiritual language in some of your work. How has that, you know, whether it's kind of the black faith space, has that weighed much, played much into your thinking?
Well, it was interesting. My father was in English. He was a professor of English. Then he started Afro American Studies
Wow.
at Penn State. When
Yeah.
after Martin Luther King was killed in 1968, he decided to go back and
Wow.
look at African American literature and began to teach that. And then
Wow.
eventually he was chairman of Afro American Studies at Yale in the early 70s. Um,
Wow.
so Henry Louis Gates was my father's student. You know,
Mm. Whew.
Cornell West was my father's student.
Okay. My
Uh,
goodness.
you
You okay,
know, it
you're
was
like
kind of
level.
a nice, like, you know, I'm
Thank you for
saying.
recalibrating our conversation here.
So they were all his students. So
Oh boy.
that's part of how, you know,
Yeah.
people, and now I knew them, you know, when they were, you know,
Mm.
back in those days.
Oh wow. Wow. Got it.
And Henry Louis Gates was actually in my class at Yale, and we were very good friends. We
Oh,
remained great friends.
got it. Got it. Oh wow. Whew, my
So,
goodness, that's
in terms
rich.
of the faith aspect, I mean, I've gone through all kinds of. Uh, I was my parents were not really religious. My father was kind of agnostic. My mother was an avowed atheist.
Yes.
She thought it, she her view was the Marxist view that it's the
Opiate of the
opiate
masses.
of the masses. Yeah, that was what it was. So I was really discouraged. I mean, I remember when I was living in Princeton. My father was the first African American professor at Princeton in the early '60s. So
Mm.
when I was in Princeton, I decided I wanted to go to Presbyterian Sunday school. I just decided I was going to go to Presbyterian Sunday school. So I went for a while, and my mother probably was disgusted, but anyway, so I did that for a little bit, but then I stopped that, and then I guess I was interested in, I read when I was taking my philosophy class in Italy. I read Kierkegaard, and so I was
Yeah,
interested in
yeah,
that, and then I was interested in the Nation of Islam too, and I was
yeah.
in
I mean,
when
one
I
would
was
imagine. One would imagine that was in the milieu. Yeah.
so all those things were something I looked at, but basically I'm not really not religious person.
Yeah. 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 I I have a regular conversation with two, maybe I would call them rather progressive black church leaders in this town, kind of every Friday. They're friends of mine, and they're left of center, let's say. And one is leads a church that's open and affirming. You know what I mean? They're uh, inclusive of LGBTQIA. Which
Oh,
is,
sure, yeah.
and so having any conversation that seeks to try to align black folk, you got to go through these markers and figure out, okay, within the context of the diaspora, how do we have a Pan-African conversation with all these different, approaches to things? And they just represent that's often challenging, right? Because the established black church is real clear, right? And they're kind of, particularly on that issue, where they stand. And so it's hard to kind of sit at the same table. Um,
Yeah, I know. I had a student who wrote a piece about the trial of Angela Davis, and she was dealing with homophobia in the black community, which is pretty interesting topic.
mm, mm,
I have to say that one of my close friends at Yale, when I was at Yale in New Haven, was Dwight Andrews, who was involved with the Black Church at Yale. I mean,
mm,
he was a minister and also got his PhD in music,
mm,
and is also a PhD in divinity as well.
mm.
And he has church in Atlanta, Georgia. He has Andrew Young's church. We used to be Andrew Young's church in Atlanta.
Oh,
And so he's always been a spiritual guide for all of us,
yes,
in many respects. And
yes.
he's a very, very deep person, very, very
Mm,
interesting person.
mm. I'm taking a note on that. Yeah, I have found that to be a challenge for me because I've often shown up in, what we call radically inclusive spaces. My sister is married to a woman, you know what I mean? I live in all these funny little bridge spaces. And so finding ways to kind of bridge those gaps,
Yeah,
uh,
I know. Yeah, yeah,
you know, it's-
yeah. I think that, yeah, I mean, that's something the church has to reconcile.
yeah,
It's kind of,
yeah.
and I know Dwight is very open.
Mm,
He's not like that.
yeah,
So, but
yeah.
he's very supportive. Also, he's a great musician too. He's performed in my band.
Yeah.
He
I mean,
plays
it's
the
hard.
fiddle.
It's hard to be anybody in the arts and be kind of, closed. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like, that's very open and affirming space typically. So, so what has been most challenging? I think that you. It seems in the written and recorded things I've read about you, rebel. Words that come up are like dissonance and juxtaposition and these kind of crossroads, where things bang up against one another. You say it
Uh-huh.
kind of explicitly in your operatic construction that you're trying to really make a true American music that blends. It's able to blend um, the African and the kind of European experience here in this country. And so I too, I think that often conflict zones or spots where things meet are ripe for the next
Oh
thing,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
revolution.
definitely.
So in your own life, have you had these moments? What have been the most significant kind of ahas around or challenges to your own evolution, both as an artist and as just a human being.
Well, I think that the music reflects those tensions. It's an inner tension too, the tensions between the idea of how political forces work,
Yeah,
how external forces influence what's going on,
yeah,
and then at the same time the struggle, the internal struggle that one has to 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 find oneself and to be true to oneself, but also to reconcile the unreconcilable, the irreconcilable. Things that may not actually, how you fit together things that maybe don't fit, or are contrasting. So that tension, I think, is something that you can reflect through music. Something you can reflect that music.
mm,
Uh, to me, it's so much about creating. It, it creates both tension and resolution, and
mm,
that's sort of a basic principle
mm,
of. And without tension, there is no resolution,
mm.
because it doesn't mean anything. Resolution means nothing if there's no tension.
Yes,
you
yes,
know so it's to me, it's like, um
yes.
so to me, that can map out into discovering the lyrical or the melodic or the lyrical coming out of things that are not are on surface, are very angular and
Yes.
dissonant, etc., because that reflects the internal and the external pressures and tensions that we all deal with. So I think that's part of the
Mm,
function in music, is
mm,
to depict that, that um, and that realize that life is a struggle,
mm,
and we struggle with things, and so
mm,
music reflects the struggle.
mm,
It reflects that struggle, but you have these moments of release,
mm,
and they mean more when you
when
successfully
you work
reflect
for
the struggle.
them.
You have to work for it. You have to earn it.
Yes,
You say it's like sometimes, too much sugar and it's saccharin.
yes, 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 yes.
So that's the thing. It's like,
Yeah,
so I think you have to earn that. You have to earn it,
yeah,
and that's something I feel in the music all the time,
yeah,
and I like to take the audience in this kind of journey through that, so that they feel those things. And in a way, it's also about empathy. Like when I wrote Five or Central Park Five or X, I want you to identify with them.
oh,
I want
sure.
the
Yeah,
audience to identify, whether white, black, Asian,
yeah,
whoever. I
yeah,
want you to be on that that
yeah,
that voyage with
yeah,
them, so that you
yeah,
feel what they feel,
yeah,
and then
yeah,
at those moments of clarity, you feel it too.
yeah.
So that's it. That's important, because rather than didactic form in which you just say, okay, this is how it is.
Yeah,
This
yeah,
is
yeah,
this is what happened.
yeah,
Rather than a didactic form,
yeah,
this is a dramatic form that
yeah,
you have to work through. You have to work through it,
yeah,
and so
yeah.
so for example, a lot of my times,
Mm,
I in the music, I spent a lot of time on the negative forces.
mhm,
Like the character of the Mask in Central Park Five, or the DA, or Donald Trump.
mhm.
All those things, saying, okay, this is what we think about it.
Yeah,
This
yeah,
is this is
yeah,
this is the you have to have, in a way, how you construct a hero is
yeah.
you have to have someone,
A foil. Yeah,
someone in
yeah.
opposition,
Yes, yeah,
and
yeah.
I think that an antagonist.
Yes.
And so I but I have to take the argument for the antagonist seriously,
Yeah,
and let it be expressed,
yeah,
so that you can both feel the rage of the person who's being
yeah,
afflicted,
yeah,
and also, you identify with them. So
yeah,
so this is and it's very funny, because I did this in Amistad too. It's almost like what Spike Lee did, when all of a sudden all this racial invective comes out, in
yeah.
those movies, parts of the movies, like in uh, I forget, I mean, it could be a Do the Right Thing, but I was
Yeah,
thinking the
yeah.
other one about the interracial relationship and Jungle Fever. And they
Yes,
have,
yes.
and then all of a sudden the characters are saying this, you know, like
That's
everything.
just
There's
wow.
something cathartic about
Yes,
that. You
yes,
know, like,
yes.
okay, just say it.
Yeah, get it all
Yeah.
out.
No, it's not just something that's not expressed.
Yeah,
I mean, but if you say it and you allow the characters to say it,
yeah,
it has the impact of that,
yeah,
and in a way, it's cathartic. And
yes.
I think that's you know what I was looking for. You know,
You know,
you
I,
like,
yeah, I have the pleasure of participating in various conversations, kind of particularly these days, about what's happening in the world, right? And I was on a call yesterday. Five guys about my age in their 40s, and five-ish, seven-ish younger guys in high school age in Brooklyn, black guys. And they were responding to the George Floyd situation and saying, you know, what does revolution look like? And what does leadership look like? What's the solution look like? What do we do? You know, and you had some older heads kind of on the phone, you know, kind of holding this moment, you know, tender for these young kids, recognizing this story has been going on for a long time. And so, how do you,
oh no, yeah, sure.
you know, how do you stay in it but not be consumed by it? And where is the work? Where's the edge of that work? And where do you choose to lean into some of that struggle and not? And you know, these days for me, more often that looks like an internal, you know, it's an inside job, if you will. So my wrestling, you know, you're mentioning external and internal forces. My ability to wrestle with kind of external forces is a direct result of my own internal wrestling with my with
Right. No,
what's
you have to
happening.
wrestle with your rage.
Yeah. Right.
Rage is rage is a very powerful
Mm-hmm.
thing, you know. And
Mm-hmm.
I remember when I wrote X,
Mm-hmm.
and to some degree Central Park Five,
Mm-hmm.
my rage sort of fueled
Mm-hmm.
writing the music. You can feel it in the music. There's a rage in it. There's a
Mm-hmm.
sense of, you know,
Mm-hmm.
that. But I try to use that feeling
Mm-hmm.
in order to convey the urgency,
Yeah.
or to convey the
Mm-hmm.
fact that the the violence that underpins it's so much a part of American society
Mm-hmm.
is something, you know, something you feel,
Mm-hmm.
that you feel as an American, you know,
Mm-hmm.
you know, certainly as an African American,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
you feel that, and your response to it, you have to be honest to a response to
Yeah.
it. So
Yes.
so
Mm-hmm.
so I think that in X, I mean, when Elijah Muhammad, Malcolm is converting to the Nation of Islam in X, and Elijah Muhammad says, "Your rage he will claim, like
Mm-hmm.
Allah will claim your rage." You know,
Mm-hmm.
and how seductive that is. Yeah, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's a your rage you will claim. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because the rage is justifiable. The
Mm-hmm.
rage is justifiable, objectively justifiable.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also an emotional response, a visceral response
Mm-hmm.
that can lead to catastrophic things. I mean, like
Yeah.
you could burn down someone's house, or you could
Yeah.
do other
Yeah.
kinds of things.
Yeah.
But think about how you can uh, that that the rages can fuel
Mm-hmm.
the creation of things too. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it can fuel you and guide you in terms of harnessing that energy.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes a kind of negative energy,
Yeah.
but making that energy, that
Mm-hmm.
that and that struggle that you feel, and
Mm-hmm.
harnessing that and putting that into art.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Have you been in situations? I mean, you have kind of two different young men, or you know, sons in your world, an athlete and kind of what we might call an artist, or you know, an author or writer. And I feel like I can picture them tonally. You know, I get those phenotypes. And I have you had opportunities to have these kinds of conversations with them around that idea of what to do with your internal agitation or your own rage, or do you
Yeah,
think?
we have had a, yeah, particularly, yeah, with both of them in different ways.
Mm-hmm.
My younger one is uh, no, it's interesting because, you know, I had to talk to him, for example, because he was going to play in the South. He was going to be in Greensboro, North Carolina. He was going to go to South Carolina. And then the team toured there, and I said,
Yeah,
you know, he's a California kid.
yeah,
okay. So, I said to him, things are different down
Yeah.
there. I
Yeah.
mean, there are some similarities, but if please be respectful.
Yeah.
Do
Yeah.
this,
Yeah.
just like self-defense. Just
Yeah.
be aware
Yeah.
that you need to think about
Yeah.
things like that.
Yeah.
That you may not have thought about here
Yeah.
in California, even though it does come out here too as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
But it's different from Mississippi, or,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
or yeah, or
Yeah.
it's different from
Yeah.
Georgia or
Yeah.
other
Like we
places.
saw. Yeah. Like
Yeah,
we
yeah.
saw.
So I'm just saying. So and also because he doesn't take nonsense from anybody.
Yeah.
It doesn't
Yeah.
take. So
Yeah.
this is a kid that'll respond right away. I mean,
Yeah.
he'll say,
Yeah.
boom. It's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
he's very righteous.
Yeah.
So he says I've say I think that's part of it. And that's
Yeah.
part of what's great about him too. I mean,
Yeah.
when he sees something isn't fair or
Yeah.
something's wrong,
Yeah.
he'll voice it right away.
Yes.
And but that gets him into situations.
Yes. Oh, I have one of these too in our house. We often say she's either going to lead a country or die trying to overthrow one, you know?
Yeah, no, 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 no. It's like he's a leader too. He's very much a leader. It's like so. I don't know if they know what to do with him in the baseball world. He's
Yes.
out there, but
Yeah.
it's like so
Wow.
because that's where he is.
Yeah.
So uh,
So why
so so
yeah.
yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you.
And my oldest son has to deal with it in different ways
Mm.
because he was so my older kid was so light skinned
Yeah.
that people didn't know he was black,
Yes.
and he was always asserting that he was black.
Yes.
And then he had teachers tell him that, for example, they were doing when he was in high school, they were doing a research project
Yeah.
to look at discrimination in like Woolworths, in
Yeah.
different stores. How are groups of black kids going to be treated different from groups of white kids?
Yeah.
So he was in junior high actually.
Yeah.
And so I get a call from the teacher because my son refused to be in the white group. And I told the teacher, if he refuses to be in the white group, he's not white. So he has every right to not to be in the white group. He
Yes.
should put him in the group he wants to be in.
Yes. Yeah.
And they said, well, I don't know. And I said, well, no, he is an African American. You got to put him in that group. I'm sorry,
Oh, isn't that interesting?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that was a weird thing. My
Yes.
other,
Yeah.
like Jonah is like, I mean, he's like now he has a hair thing like Odell Beckham with a blonde streak, and he's very
Yeah.
out there. It's like no way,
Oh man. Yeah, my daughter, so I'm married to a white woman. I'm half black myself, right? So I've got these quarter kids that you might not know. Some black folks might pick up a little bit like, oh, I think there's something else maybe going on in there. So we're starting to just now have those conversations like, well, how do I identify? Like, where do I fit? And how does that feel?
I know that's interesting. Yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it was funny, but my older son never. He always identified that way. He
Mm-hmm.
never. The only time he did was when they asked him his race one time, the form when he was applying to college, he put down human.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
but he's also a science fiction writer, so
Yes.
that's a different
He likes to
thing.
play with all those definitions.
Yeah, so that's it. But I think you know
Mm,
that's any questions are really
yeah.
important like that.
So what
And
you were telling me you're kind of reworking X. What is that? I mean, seems like the story never really changes, but the current milieu, obviously, I feel like. Well, let me back up a little bit even more. Do you think? Why do you think you got the Pulitzer for Central Park Five? What was that saying, or what? You've been doing this for a while. What was it particular about that work, or is it a timing thing, or what? What do
I'm
you?
quite sure timing is part of it. I think also that I think uh, I guess the music spoke to people. I so they
Yeah.
I think it was kind of a culmination of a lot of my work I've done over the last, 20, 30 years. And all that went into the
Yeah.
piece.
Yeah. So did it feel like that for you personally? So if you had to point of what you've contributed for you, did that feel like I don't know if denouement is the right word, but kind of like yes, in this I've kind of
No, I wouldn't say that. Maybe I
okay.
actually, it could, for me, it was interesting because it was the tightest of my pieces in many respects. Very tight. A lot of
Mhm.
nothing
Yeah. No
extraneous.
extra. Yeah.
Boom. It's straight right to the heart. Right. It's right there. It is.
There it is. Yeah.
And I think my like Amistad,
Yeah.
it was really ambitious. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, in terms of what it was trying to cover and to me the heavy implications of slavery.
Mm-hmm.
What slavery means to us today,
Yeah.
and what it meant, and
Yeah.
looking at that from all different perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
And X also, because it was also my first opera, and discovering that the
Mm-hmm.
form and realizing how I would approach an opera,
Mm-hmm.
and actually discovering it as I wrote it.
Yeah.
So that was very exciting
Wow.
too. So but I think that with the Central Park Five has had Richard Wesley wrote a wonderful libretto. And how we was finally in its final shape. It was very tight and very had all the elements in it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it also speaks to this time. I mean, uh, putting Donald Trump in it and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
realizing that that was sort of the beginning of his political career.
Yeah.
Exploiting these five young men,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Mm-hmm.
so that I think that I think it's a moment too to realize that for those of us doing political work in art,
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
that I hope that it encourages other people to pursue the idea that art can respond to our time and can
Mm-hmm.
respond to what's going on in our country, and in the world. So it's not some separate, delicate thing that's
Mm-hmm.
has nothing has only not that's not directly influenced by what is happening. It does not reflect, and art should reflect on what on what we feel today and what's
Mm-hmm.
going on. And so that's what I hope that encourages others, the
Mm-hmm.
younger generation, that they can do that too, that they shouldn't edit themselves and
Mm-hmm.
feel that oh, I can't do that,
Mm-hmm.
like there's some rules,
Yes.
and
Ooh, that's a good word. Yeah, that's a good word. Mm.
so
Is there art that you see out today? So this is a typical question maybe, but what I'm curious about, where are you? What's giving you that kind of quickening, or do you see spots where um, the contribution of art to do that framing that you just described is particularly uh, poignant, or
uh,
artists?
yeah,
Yeah.
I see it. A lot of my contemporaries. Someone did an opera on Move on the opera on the Philadelphia uprising.
Mm-hmm.
The housing crisis that actually happened when we were doing X.
Oh wow.
I was doing X in 1985. Was here that the uh, move crisis happened in Philadelphia, and
Mm-hmm.
actually had to maybe us change the ending of the opera, because originally in the opera we had a gunshot at the end, and we couldn't have the gunshot because the mayor was going to attend, and he had threats on his life, so
Oh
we
wow.
weren't allowed to have a gunshot. And
Oh.
actually that made the opera much better, because we take it only to when Malcolm says assalamu alaikum,
Uh,
guns come up,
yeah.
that's the end.
Oh
So
wow.
you don't actually see him fall or see
Yes.
that happen, or
Yes.
hear
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
gunshots, none
Yeah.
of that.
Yeah.
It's that moment
Ooh,
prior to it.
wow. Well,
And but everyone knows it's going to happen, but
yeah.
that's what I think is
Yeah.
but I think that was much more, in a way, uh, it's much more horrific what you think in your mind than what
Mhm.
what
Oh,
you show on
sure.
the stage.
Sure. Sure. Yeah.
So that was. and I think that was great. But I'm saying that, but someone did an opera about that, but Bill T. Jones directed, and Daniel Romaine wrote the music.
Mm-hmm.
And no, I think there are more African Americans working in Kuru Okuru. Is did an opera about Harriet Tubman.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
there's much more
Yeah.
there's much more activity now.
Yeah, what's kind of ringing out when we first started, you said something around, um, oh, that this was your contribution to the struggle was to do it through this lane. And I read elsewhere where, your opportunity to actually employ black folks in opera and to kind of break into this space and introduce black experience and voices, and, and create jobs in those spaces,
Yeah, yeah,
you know.
yeah. I think that was at the time in the '80s, and when we did the Opera City Opera, we had I made I part of the X is they have to have 10 performers who are improvisers
Mm,
within the in the orchestra pit.
mm.
So at the time, I think they had one African American member in the orchestra at New York City Opera. So all of a sudden, they had all these other people in the orchestra, you know, and I think that was great. I think and also to bring that culture and that music into the orchestra too.
Yeah,
To celebrate the fact that it's not just some pale imitation like Porgy and Bess of African
yes,
American culture.
yeah,
This is from what we do.
yes. Oh, I love it. So then, what's next? I know we're heading towards the hour here. I don't want to keep you all afternoon long. It's we're
I
creeping.
don't know. I mean, I have a lot of projects.
Hmm.
I had most of my projects were canceled, with the crisis and stuff. So that's why I was working on X, because all of a sudden I had the space and time where
Yeah,
I said I can go back and look at
yeah,
some because I didn't have a commission right away to work on.
yeah.
And but I'm thinking toward the future. I have a, a project, The Darkest Light in the Heart, which is about the Dylan Roof shootings,
Hmm.
um, from the perspective of the woman who forgave him, and that deals with issues of faith and religion, and actually God and Satan appear in the opera. Yes, two African American men on a park bench talking about, and Satan makes this very strong argument, about why should black people love you? Why? I
Hmm.
mean, look at what's happened for 400 years.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah,
You know, so so so
yeah.
that was interesting. It was the funny part about it is that we were going to do it in Charleston at the Spoleto Festival,
Woo.
and then the Mother Emanuel Church didn't like the libretto. They were unhappy with the fact that we were dealing with faith and all this stuff.
Oh,
And I said,
really?
well, well, the whole point is, yeah, she comes out with faith. I mean, so that
I
faith
know.
has to be challenged. I
He's
mean,
like, wait for the
there's
resolution.
no challenge to faith. You don't have a drama, man. I mean, I'm sorry, Oh, that's the problem with faith-based stuff sometimes. Oh my God. I
Yeah.
said like, well, if you always had faith, there's no story, man.
Yes,
If
yes.
you always, it has to be,
That's
I
the
mean,
whole
it's like
point.
I always think about Kierkegaard, with the story like the story of Abraham and Isaac.
Yeah,
Well, if Abraham's part of his faith is he has to be willing to sacrifice his son,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Now you got to say, well, God's never gonna. Well,
yeah, yeah.
no,
You don't
he's gonna
know.
work. He's gonna work that. So this is like
Yeah,
this is the heavy part of it. You mean what if you're gonna believe, really believe, or
yes.
what?
Yeah,
That's what I mean. So that story what Kierkegaard unpacked it
yeah.
is, sort of like what we were doing too.
I've sometimes asked folks, what's the unspoken message, that your people are telling you, who you raised you, your mom and dad, whoever. Um, so I'm curious about what your unspoken or spoken message is. At the end of it all, kind of what is it you are wanting to communicate with your life and your work? I know that's a
Oh,
big question. I know that's a big question.
wow. I don't know. I think what I want to communicate is the vitality and uh, and dynamic potential of the African American community, that and our history, that our history uh, that our history is universal,
Mm-hmm.
that we are that there are universal stories that we can tell from our history that tell us about who we are as human beings, and that that through that we we also to change the world with your art. I mean, that's the idea. Try to do that. I mean, you don't know if you'll ever do that, but
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
Wow. Hey, I appreciate what you're doing in the world, what you've been doing in the world, and for taking the time to sit and chat
Well,
with me.
thank you. Thanks. It was great to talk to you.
Yeah. I will let you know when this is out in the world somewhere.
Well,
And
Matthew, it's great to talk to you. So, with any time,
all
yeah.
right. Well, stay safe and well. And that smile you've got is infectious. You have a light spirit to you. So, thanks for spending time.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Matthew. Okay, so long. Bye.